everyone, Loremaster of Sotek here, back with today's Greenskin Q&A. Apologize, this one's a little late today, but we're going to be mass recording them, so the next few episodes will all be out at 7 a.m. Central Standard Time, at least the American Central Standard Time, for the following weekdays. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. So, our first two questions today come from DatOrkBoss. And his first one is, what is Goblin Tongue / Orcish like as a language? Do Greenskins use glyphs and pictures as some sort of written language? And I know Greenskins are able to learn other languages quickly like Scarsnik. Can Orcs and Goblins usually learn languages of the people close to them? So, Goblin Tongue as a language it's probably the best way to describe it is it's a very heavily offensive and wild language in that it sounds very silly, especially because of their accents and how exaggerated a lot of the speech patterns of Greenskins are. Like when they translate their language to English and you get them saying like "zogget" and they're like just dropping letters and all that stuff, they have that really heavily accented speech. That's them speaking, that's like translated Goblin Tongue. So their language is just as messy in their own tongue as it is when you translate it into English or Reichsspiel. So but I mean, it's a fairly effective language for communicating. Goblins speak it the best. Orcs don't have any issues speaking it. Orcs tend to be a lot less wordy than goblins are. And orcs have a much less complicated system of speaking compared to goblins, which is why many orcs consider goblins extremely annoying. It's because goblins can literally just keep talking endlessly. And a big part of that is goblins trying to confuse their larger brethren. But those are the two main species that speak it. You, of course, have other variants of creatures that can understand or speak it. For instance, most giants vaguely understand Goblin Tongue. And a lot of the time, it's either the giants themselves outright understand and are capable of speaking it, or goblins have picked up how to speak the language of the giants. It depends on the giant in question. But trolls, most trolls, especially the ones that hang around Greenskins, they understand Goblin. Which the Orcish language is just called Goblin Tongue. That's just the common name for it. It doesn't have any fancy name or anything like that to it. And we don't have any like great records about how it's spoken, just because every time Greenskins do speak, it's always automatically translated into Reichsspiel, so there aren't any like really in-depth translation guides like we have with Kazalid, for instance, or Saurian, which is the Lizardman language, or Dark Tongue, or any of that. But, so, when it comes to their glyphs and pictures, some Greenskins use that, mostly Savage Orcs. Savage Orcs are very fond, well, all Greenskins, if they have to write, most of the time it's going to be based on a picture system, because there is not a written language for Greenskins. Most Greenskins either don't know how to write, or a lot of them don't know how to read either. It's very, very rare. It takes like a particularly intelligent goblin or orc to be able to read, which some can, but not very many. Most of the time, they will use types of pictures to communicate with one another. Like, that's why when you go into a Greenskin settlement, there are signs everywhere. You literally have all these like faces that represent different really brief ideas, like that maybe this is where the animal pens are, or maybe this is supposed to be where the squigs go, or maybe this is supposed to be where the black orcs hang out, or where the loot pile is, whatever. So they do have a really simplified form of communicative language outside of speech, but it's not very well developed. And some the Greenskins that can read and write really, really well, for instance, Skarsnik keeps like pages and pages and pages of notes. He has entire books full of his ideas and strategies and thoughts, but he's really unusual, and his writing, if I remember right, is sort of a bastardization of Reichsspiel, Kazalid, and then he basically tosses in his own writings that he's kind of created to supplement Goblin Tongue ideas that he can't express very well in the other two languages. But Scarsnik would be considered fluent in Reichspiel for sure, and he understands enough Kozilid to be able to he has a rudimentary understanding of it. But as far as most Greenskins, they are pretty bad at learning other languages. Most Greenskins might recognize a singular word. So, like, because the Greenskins fight the dwarves so much, they know Kazook is a battle cry, and they vaguely understand that it means death. But most Greenskins don't know any other languages beyond their own. There is a very select handful among the millions of orcs and goblins across the planet who know how to speak anything more than Goblin Tongue. And it's, even when they do know how to speak something different, it's usually either their greatest rival and they've just kind of picked it up, or it's someone that they build alliances with frequently enough that they have built an understanding. So, for instance, you might see some night goblins who may know bits and pieces of Queekish. Like, Skarsnik can speak Queekish because he learned it from a Skaven slave or stuff like that. But most of the time, it's other races learning how to speak Goblin so they can communicate with the Greenskins. It's very rarely the opposite. All right, next question, which is also from DatOrkBoss, is I know Orcs and Goblins have inhabited fallen Dwarf Holds, as well as some of their own structures, such as Massif Orcal and smaller tribes. I don't often hear of them staying in any Empire, Bretonnian, or Elven settlements for long periods of time. What other sorts of settlements and structures do Orcs and other Greenskins like to occupy/live in? So, Greenskins are a notably destructive race, and because of that, they're not able to stay in an environment for very long if it's not made of materials that allow it to take a beating, like Dwarven Holds. Every time the Greenskins have conquered a human city, they loot it and they burn it just without any reservation or holding back until everything that's left is literally just a smashed pile of debris on the ground. So, like, for instance, that's what happened to Nuln and Averheim during waggggggggghhhhhh, was he managed to take down both of those huge cities in the Empire, but the Greenskins didn't claim it because it wasn't capable of surviving their attention. So eventually they get bored and leave because everything there just breaks as soon as they start messing with it. Plus, on top of that, the big thing about why we don't see orcs in Bretonnian, human, Elven cities is that all of those cities tend to be built on, like, a plateau or a hill or something where there's no underground element involved, right? Maybe a human settlement will have a sewer, but that's like as deep as it goes unless you have a Skaven problem. And for Greenskins, that is not a suitable environment for their spores to take root and for new Greenskins to basically be produced. If you're dealing with just an open to the elements environment, for whatever reason, it seems that almost always results in Greenskins not being able to survive in that environment. Whether it's, I don't know if that's due to purely, maybe there's too much sunlight, or maybe the soil there isn't full of the proper materials, or maybe it's not hot enough. I'm not sure what it is exactly that makes human or open air settlements so not attractive to Greenskin spores, but it's a notable issue that leads to them never taking root in those kinds of places. If Greenskins are going to take over and actually settle, it has to be somewhere that can produce more orcs and goblins, or snotlings, or squigs, or whatever. Which means it needs to be either deep underground, or it needs to be some kind of jungle, or like deep jungle, deep forest, a big cave. Basically, there needs to be shelter that seems to protect them from the elements, and there needs to be some kind of environment that allows them to fight a lot, either against each other or against just the natural races or fauna that live there. But it takes yeah, they just seem to really struggle with that, because the Greenskins, for instance, have never been able to get a foothold on Ulthuan. Even when Wagg showed up and torched Torir Visi, but even though he was eventually defeated by Atharion the Grim, the Greenskins, a lot of them escaped, but of all the ones who died, you figure that, oh, they would have dropped down spores and Ulthuan would have a greenskin problem. But they didn't. Now, some of that is due to, it is noted that the elves were pretty particular about using flames to burn as much of the greenskin dead as they could find, just to make sure. But it may have been an unnecessary step, because there wasn't really an environment for the greenskins to... Granted, if they had gotten up into the mountains, that would have been bad. But they didn't. They got stopped before they managed to get out of like the open fields and the beaches. So that seems to kind of be the main thing, is that for greenskins to thrive and to actually set up a settlement, it needs to be some kind of heavily enclosed, fairly dark space that can get, if it doesn't at least go underground, it needs to have very, very heavy terrain features, like a really deep forest, a really deep jungle, etc. Because, you know, in the Badlands, sure, it's just a big wasteland, but the Badlands is covered in underground space. Like, almost the entirety of the Badlands either has underway roads going through it, or Skaven tunnels, or just natural, you know, huge cracks in the ground that lead down for miles. So that kind of seems to be the big major reason we don't see greenskins ever set up a in the middle of nowhere permanent encampment. Like, they might camp out for a bit, you know, set up like a war camp where they build siege weapons and stuff, but that's it, really. All right, next up is zachbsain, whose question is, what area of the world is the most populated with greenskins? And if there was a war boss willing to do it, could a big enough wall fit through the chaos waste to the realm of chaos? So for the first part of the question, the Badlands are considered the most densely populated region when it comes to greenskins. It's kind of their racial capital, the Badlands. So, and the way we can easily tell that is every time a war boss has united even a amount of the tribes in the Badlands, it has ended up being a disaster for some empire or some part of the world. You know, every time a wall forms in the Badlands, and it either goes to like the Border Princes, the Empire, the Dwarven Realms, the Land of the Tomb Kings, or wherever, it always wrecks a pretty significant amount of damage before it gets put down. As for the second part of the question, theoretically, if it would need to be like the wall, it would need to be Ragnarok, which I know sounds ridiculous, but that's the name Games Workshop gave to the greenskin concept of the end of the world, which most races have their own term for it, but for greenskins it's called Ragnarok, and also known as the last Wa. And for them, that situation would need to occur in order for the realm of chaos itself to be threatened. It wouldn't be impossible for a fairly good-sized Wa, if it for some reason started going north without pause, to enter the chaos waste and make it to the realm of chaos. But to actually threaten the realm of chaos, you would probably need to unite most, if not all, of greenskin kind. Like, it would have to be what Wurzag was trying to do in the end times, where Wurzag was trying to have there be an avatar of Gork and an avatar of Mork, with Gork being Grimgor Ironhide and Mork being Skarsnik. If that had worked and he had gotten the two of them together and they had been willing to work together, then they would have easily had the ability, well, relatively easy, had the ability to get all the greenskins in the old world, which that would have been such a large gathering. I'm pretty sure it would have started to draw greenskins from other continents at a certain point, just due to the sheer amount of energy being gathered by them. And if that had happened, then they would have had a wall that would have definitely been capable of going to the realm of chaos and being a sincere, genuine threat to the dark gods. I think even the four brothers of chaos would have been in a really bad pickle if that many greenskins had shown up in the realm of chaos. Because especially at that point, if you have that many greenskins in the realm of chaos, there would be very, very little stopping Gork and Mork from physically manifesting. So that, and that would be kind of a nasty situation. So hopefully that answers that. Next up, we've got Cat59, who asks, what would happen if a vampire tried to feed from or turn a greenskin? When it comes to feeding, they'd be fine. It just wouldn't taste very good. Greenskins can be fed on by vampires. It's just really gross, taste-wise, and not very satisfying. As for could you turn a greenskin, I do not think turning a greenskin would be possible. It would just die immediately. Because to turn a creature, the base material, or like the base that you're trying to corrupt, has to be relatively human. And the reason for that is the curse of vampirism was caused by a group of humans, or Nehekarans, drinking a very corrupted form of the elixir of immortality, which Nagash made the original elixir of immortality, and it made him literally immortal. In that even if Nagash dies, it's more like it's not really that he died, it's more that his physical form has been destroyed to the point that he cannot physically manifest, but he's still around, which is why resurrecting for Nagash is not that hard, relatively speaking. Most people have zero chance of coming back from the dead. Nagash can bring himself back from the dead when certain circumstances are met. But for the vampires, what they did is Neferata drank she was the first vampire. She created and drank you think of it as a corrupt or not very good elixir of immortality, that it made her immortal, but came with the caveat that they have to drink the blood of the living in order to sustain themselves, in order for their immortality to even work. And the longer they go without it, the more rabid and animalistic they become, until they either starve or reach a point where they just keep turning into bigger and nastier things until they finally manage to get a hold of some food. And the way they spread that, of course, is they perform the blood kiss, which they can use to turn other people into vampires. And for the thousands and thousands and thousands of years that vampires have been around, they have only turned humans, and in one case, a halfling. But what's notable about the halfling, which was turned by Conrad von Karstein and was almost more of a joke, was that I think the thing about it is that the creature you're turning has to be roughly human in composition. And what I mean by that is when the old ones created all of the main order races, because those are mostly the children of the old ones. So when the old ones showed up, they made the lizardmen, totally separate species from everything else, right? Then they made the elves, totally separate species from everything else. Then they made the dwarves, totally separate species from everything else. And then they started making the humans, and as chaos was coming closer and closer, they, using the same base that they had made the humans from, they also started working on the halflings and ogres at the last second before they got wiped out. But the humans, the halflings, and the ogres were all incomplete. They were not finished creations. And they definitely did not only were they not finished in the sense that they were imperfect and not what they're really supposed to be, but they also they also seem to have come from the same base stock, whatever that was. And because of that, I don't think you could turn anything outside of the human group into a vampire. It has to be from that origin. But that does mean that a very determined vampire could probably turn halflings and could probably turn ogres. Which, to be honest, a ogre vampire would probably be the most dangerous creature ever. Like, that would literally be a nightmarish creature. But I think those three, I think they are genuinely the only races that could be turned into vampires. I don't think you could turn any elves or dwarves or greenskins, lizardmen, or any of those other races. And for anyone that tries to swoop in with the end times thing, the end times are really messy in that a lot of really strange stuff started happening that in prior to the end times would have been completely impossible. So there's that caveat. And the second is that there was an elf who in Nagash was captured by Manfred and supposedly turned, her name was Eldraya, and she was Tyrion's squire. And so Manfred thought he turned her into a vampire, but he didn't. What actually happened is he turned her, or what he thought he did by giving her the blood kiss was turning into a vampire. But what actually happened was she became the mortal avatar. I think it was a Rithkiel. It was either a Rithkiel or the other, I forget what her name is, but there's another kind of dark mistress or dark goddess of the elves. And she, because all of the elven gods had mortal avatars, is what the end times kind of revealed. And a lot of them showed up during the end times, which was kind of weird. It was like they had always been there, but not really, JK. It was really messily written. But it was revealed that no, she's a Rithkiel, and so she's able to, and she used all of the souls of the elves who had died to do this other thing. But there was a lot of confusion apparently between the writers of the end times, and this is my biggest problem with the end times. It had a lot of problems, but the biggest one it had was that the writers didn't talk to each other at all. It was basically like somebody put up a whiteboard in front of 10 authors with some bullet points about things that had to happen, and then they were like, okay, do whatever you want with the rest, and none of them talked to each other. So there are super conflicting stories about what happened when. So in one of the storylines of the end times, it turned out that Eldraya was not a vampire. She was in fact a Rithkiel, and she used her power to use the souls of the elves to do this plot thing. But then there was another book at the end of the end times. They're like these little short novels that you can get that were like accompaniment books. And in the very, very last one, which is called Lord of the End Times, Eldraya turns out was actually a vampire and was not a mortal avatar of a god. And she meets up with Tyrion and is like, I'm an abomination. And he's like, oh, that sucks. And he just like chops her head off and kills her. So it's a super, it's super confusing. So like when it comes to lore stuff, I don't count the end times because it's so messy that even the authors had no fucking idea what they were doing. So anyway, that was a huge tangent to just say, no, greenskins cannot be vampires. All right, next up, we've got a Cube who asks, have there been orcs who serve goblins? Yeah, that happens all the time. It just has to be a strong enough goblin. But there's been a bunch. The most famous ones, of course, Skarsnik and Grom the Paunch both had tons of orc underlings. They just basically showed off that they were either stronger or could just kill anyone that tried to challenge them. And once a warboss is like winning a bunch, as long as they don't put themselves in a position where an orc can attack them and beat them up, then they're easily going to have tons of orc underlings. No problem. Especially if they just keep winning, because greenskins very rarely rebel against a warboss who's doing good. It's only when they lose that bad things start to happen. But yeah, all the time. Shockwave09 asks, how organized is Greenskin's society? Like, do they have mines set up together or in forges to create the massive amount of weapons and armor for the crazy Greenskin numbers, and the same for farming? Their stupidity and love of war is a big part of their character, but how do they make it into a society like at Black Crag or just out in the wilds? Also, how intelligent are Greenskins as a whole, and how do these intelligent ones such as Scarsnik organize the others? So, most Greenskins are pseudo-nomadic tribes that just wander around a set area where they scavenge everything they need to survive. So they basically either attack other greenskin tribes, or they attack trespassers in their territory, or they, will loot tombs, or if there is a human settlement or a dwarf settlement in their ballpark, they'll attack them. That's where they're going to get all of their weapons, armor, and food from, essentially. And when it really comes down to food, greenskins have zero qualms about eating each other. And that is a massive part of the greenskin diet, is eating each other. Farming is super rare in greenskin culture. And in fact, I would actually say farming specifically is virtually non-existent. There are less than 5 greenskin settlements on the planet that have figured out something as sophisticated as farming. But for the most part, they just wander around and get what they need. The two kinds of greenskins that are actually pretty big on setting up a base are forest and night goblins, because they tend to set up in a particular area and almost always establish a base. They're very rarely nomadic, and it's because it's because they have a lot less territory to work with. They can't just roam, because they tend to live in really claustrophobic spaces, like really deep forests or really, really deep caves. And on top of that, both of them are the primary animal breeding types of tribes. The night goblins deal with wyverns, squigs, and a fair amount of trolls, whereas you have the forest goblins, who of course deal with all the spiders. So they have to kind of be rooted in one location. And because of that, they actually have functioning societies, though they are super duper messy and very chaotic. So if you take night goblins, if we take the one we know the best, which is the night goblins of Carrick 8 Peaks. The night goblins of Carrick 8 Peaks have pits. They basically have these areas where they know all of the birth room areas, so where all the new greenskins get born from, are below these areas. And when greenskins get born, they dig upwards until they reach what they think is the surface, but it's usually another cave. And the night goblins and the forest goblins will meticulously mark where these guys are going to come out, if they can predict it, which usually they're pretty good about. And they will put like their runt bosses there, who are the guys in charge of figuring out which ones to keep and all that stuff, and raising them. But they also, the night goblins of Carrick 8 Peaks have mushroom farms where they're not super great when it comes to farming. It's more of they do what they can to encourage mushroom growth, and they know where mushrooms grow, and they have entire almost armies of the smallest night goblins whose job it is to just run around in these really claustrophobic environments and these really tiny tunnels and stuff, to just go look for flesh rooms and mushrooms and get all the different stuff they need to eat. But, you'll have some, for instance, in the Carrick 8 Peaks, you have some types of squigs are intentionally farmed to be used as kind of like very dangerous cattle. They're farmed for their meat so they can be eaten, but of course they're squigs, so a lot of the time they end up eating their own handlers, which, just means they're going to get bigger. But, and for forest goblins, their society kind of revolves a lot more about raising spiders, but they live very symbiotic lives with their spiders. So the forest goblins have adapted so that they basically do everything they can to assist the spiders, and vice versa. So they eat whatever the spiders eat, yada yada. But sometimes they'll eat themselves, other goblins, or they will eat some spiders if maybe a spider is killed or something happens to it where it's no longer useful, or it has some kind of disability. Maybe loses one of its legs in a fight or something. But so you have that, and then of course they have their pens where they train and keep war beasts. So for the night goblins, you have mostly squig farming and squig breeding. For the forest goblins, you have them doing spider breeding, and where they keep all the egg clutches to like take care of them and stuff like that. But ultimately, I wouldn't say there's a great blueprint for Greenskin society, just because no two Greenskin tribes, much less fortresses, which are typically hundreds of tribes, all conglomerated into some massive space, no two Greenskin settlements will be the same. Just because the Greenskin logic is you don't worry about something until you need it. So they just kind of throw crap together at the last second and have very little, if any, regard for careful planning or zoning considerations, like trying to figure out, where things should be. That is very rarely something they think about. Probably the only Greenskin on Earth who has maps and actually, figures out where stuff should go and makes plans in advance is Skarsnik. I would say he is the only Greenskin ever to do that. All of the other ones, even the smartest ones like Gorfang Rotgut, Gorbad Ironclaw, and all those guys, they just kind of go with the flow. Like, they just have a base that they live in, and everyone else just swarms in trying to get a piece of that pie, and they just, beat heads to make sure that people follow the rules as far as don't mess with me, and anything you get, I get a part of because I'm the boss. That's as advanced as it gets. And when it comes to the intelligence thing, Greenskins are pretty freaking stupid. They are damn dumb. Scarsnik and Gorfang are probably the only intelligent Greenskins who are alive right now who aren't completely insane. You have some Greenskins like Wurzag, the prophet, who is very intelligent, but he is absolutely out of his mind and is bonkers always because he has the Great Green and the voices of Gork and Mork constantly going on in his head. So he's not even 100% aware of what's going on around him a lot of the time. Most of the shamans are completely nuts. Many of them are smart, but they're so just goofy that I wouldn't describe them as intelligent. So Gorfang and Skarsnik are the only really intelligent Greenskins. You do also have some that I would describe as clever when it comes to just dealing violence, which for that I would say Grimgor Ironhide is very clever when it comes to fighting. Snagla Grobspit and Gatilla the Hunter, those are both two famous one of those is a Wolf Rider goblin who's very famous. He's not a hobgoblin, contrary to some people's belief. He's just a goblin who rides a wolf. But he's like a genius tactician. But that's like where his intelligence stops. And then you have Snagla Grobspit, who is a very, very nasty, clever ambusher tactician. And he's actually, if you ever play Greenskins in Total War, the two regiments of renown, the Death Creepers, are Snagla Grobspit, who is a forest goblin. Those are his personal bodyguard. That's where that unit comes from. And then Gatilla the Hunter, I believe it's I think it's the Moon Howlers are his special regiment. I think it's the Moon Howlers. But in any event, yeah, there's not a lot of Greenskins who are truly intelligent. There are some that have a gift for tactics, like you have Gorbad Ironclaw, who's, when it comes to tactical warfare, the most genius Greenskin there's ever lived. But he's been supposedly dead for 500 years. We don't know if he's actually dead or not, but he hasn't been seen in 500 years. And so ultimately, when it comes to intelligence, we got Gorfang, who's an orc, and you got Skarsnik, who's a goblin. Skarsnik, though, is leagues smarter than Gorfang, because Skarsnik actually has applicable skills for his intelligence. Gorfang is very intelligent for an orc, and even by a human standard, Gorfang is pretty smart. But he's not like a genius. He's just not an idiot, which among Greenskins makes him a genius. So hopefully that answers that question. And man, we're out of time. So those are a lot of some of the biggest questions that at least I have on the current list. There is, of course, lots more to go. So I will see you guys tomorrow up and early at 7 a.m. Central Standard Time. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.